Hello and welcome to another episode of CI Stories. In today's video, we want to continue our little series about the ocean robots, and I've already shown you videos about the remotely operated vehicles or ROVs and the existing AUVs or autonomous underwater vehicles. In today's video, we want to look at the ground that lies exactly in between these two categories, and that is what we call hybrid vehicles. And this is particularly interesting because these vehicles are very interesting for under ice applications and are, for example, the type of vehicle that have been used in the recent Endurance 22 expedition where we found the wreck of the Endurance. So these vehicles are either referred to as hybrid vehicles or often also as hybrid ROVs or HROVs. Also, they go often under the term of lightly tethered uncrewed underwater vehicles. So these are basically the same terms for or similar terms for the same thing. So let's look what does hybrid actually mean in this case. And you all probably know the term hybrid from cars. You can buy cars or other buses or stuff that are driven by two methods of propulsion or fuel supply. So there's the supply by fuel and by an electric motor, for example, in the same car. That is what we call a hybrid car. So it basically unifies two different propulsion concepts into one single thing. Now, for uncrewed underwater vehicles, that means that we unify the properties of an ROV and of an AUV into the same vehicle. And you can already see that they have quite some differences. Usually ROVs are a very bulky working tool, while AUVs often are very slender to travel a long time, but ROVs are meant for manipulation and AUVs are meant for bigger surveying bigger areas. But the most striking differences between the two is that usually ROVs are controlled through a tether cable and AUVs typically do not have a tether. So the AUV is running free and there is no line that you can pull on. So the hybrid ROVs or hybrid vehicles in general try to kind of link up these two types of vehicles, which in principle you would think you can't really unify easy. And it all comes back again to military innovation. And here the main question was, how can a torpedo be controlled during the attack? Like the early torpedoes usually they were just listening for something loud and then going into something loud, which had the big disadvantage that if your own submarine or ship was the loudest thing because the target was far away, your torpedo could actually turn around and hit your own ship. So that's why pretty early on the military started to work with something called wire-guided torpedoes, and that is a vehicle where you basically keep control over the vehicle, but it is still an autonomous vehicle. So it has its own power and own payload with it, but you keep a little and thin communication line to the vehicle that gives you the chance to change the mission and either, for example, in the case of a submarine, abort an attack or retask a torpedo during its firing phase. So this technology has been adapted also in the scientific field for what we now call hybrid vehicles. So what is really the trick here? So there's basically two states in a hybrid vehicle. So either it acts as a remotely controlled vehicle or it is an autonomous vehicle. And it's a very tricky thing to get a smooth control over these transitions so that, for example, the hybrid vehicle realizes, oh, my communication line has been lost, and now I need to switch to my autonomous mode to deal with the problems myself, or to get this autonomous out from that autonomous mode and get yeah, user control again. So these transitions are a very tricky thing. And then on the other hand, one thing that is very tricky, you need a tether, but a tether that is very lightweight. And most of the cases, this is done by some fiber optic cable, and that can either be some completely unprotected spools of single-use fiber that just spool off and are lost, or as we use on the Endurance 22 expedition, they can be stored on a big winch with excessive lengths of up to 20 kilometers of tether cable. So managing that tether is very important because you don't want to get entangled in 20 kilometers of tether, or if you use single-use fiber, you don't actually see that tether in the water. So it's very easy to drive over your own tether and ruin your own connection. So these are the basic principles of hybrid vehicles. So we now go into the different vehicles that exist, and here one of the first scientific vehicles that used this approach of hybrid vehicles extensively was developed by a Bhutto Oceanographic Institution, was the vehicle Nereus. And Nereus had very specific tasks, and they had very specific motivations to use this technology. And one of the reasons was they wanted to really explore the deep ocean, and they went down, even down to the Marianas Trench, to water depth over 10 kilometers. And it turns out that steel cables that are longer than 10 kilometers are very hard to handle. They are, first of all, you need special cables because a not special steel cable actually basically rips under its own weight with that length. But mainly, if you then take a special steel cable, it's something very heavy, very big, and basically you don't have much freedom to control, and your vehicle is basically driven by what the cable does in the water. So they developed this vehicle with special buoyancy, with special electronics housing to go deep down, and they used the fiber technology to have the freedom to not have a heavy steel cable, and then they could also move far away from the survey vessels, so they could explore things that are, for example, too dangerous, for example, subsea volcanoes where the ship can't go very close. And also they already looked at the polar application. It was a very famous vehicle, but unfortunately it imploded catastrophically in 2014, and a friend of mine was actually piloting it at that stage. And yeah, he described it as a very frustrating moment when suddenly all screens turned black and they didn't have any control over the vehicle anymore, and they just knew something bad had happened. And after some hours, they saw remnants of buoyancy popping up at the sea surface. So that vehicle was lost. And here is you see a sketch how that vehicle worked. So you had this on the left side, you see these spools of fiber optic cable, and you can see that uh, this optical fiber is just merely thicker than a human hair, so a really thin and weak thing. So you bring first a depressor unit into the water where there's one fiber spool, and behind the vehicle is towing a so-called tow body, and these two spools are basically freely spooling off up to 40 kilometers of tether, so the vehicle now has a free range of motion. With the demise of Nereus was also the birth of a new vehicle, and Woodsall finally targeted what they initially had looked for these technologies to go into the polar regions. And in the polar regions, it is very important that you can use this hybrid technology. So here you see now Nereid under ice, the follow-up vehicle of Nereus. And on this picture, you can nicely see it on the expedition I was on in 2014, how we hauled it over the side. It's hanging on the crane hook, and you can see the vehicle at the very bottom, and then the red tow body and the white depressor body. And underwater, these two bodies would separate, and up to 40 kilometers of unprotected fiber spool off between these. So the vehicle is bringing its own power, but you still have high bandwidth data communication, enabling precise manipulation and survey. in the polar region, it's very important that you have this very large footprint of up to 20 kilometers, because the sea ice is moving while your vessel is so-called is basically stationary, but actually it's not stationary. So the sea ice is moving with up to half a knot of speed. So you need quite some horizontal movement to go under the ice. If you want to go to a black smoke or under sea ice, you need this freedom, and hence hybrid vehicles are really, really well in perform really well in the polar regions. And because that system was quite great and stuff, other scientific institutes started developing also different hybrid ROVs. And Marum, the institute here in Bremen, they started developing one which was meant to already be finished in 2014 as well. And here you see it in the test pool, but unfortunately, that vehicle suffered a lot of problems with delivery issues. That, for example, the buoyancy foam they ordered was not fit for purpose, and same with the motors and the electronics. So they are still trying to get this vehicle going. But I have seen it. It's sitting here in the shed. People are working on it, and they hope to get it going in the coming years. Similarly, the French Institute was building a hybrid ROV, what they call Ariane, and this is a more of a traditional ROV that became a hybrid. So they mostly use it for image survey data. So it's looks quite different, and it's not a flatfish, but just a typical bulky ROV. However, similar to the Marum ROV, actually there is by now at least one proper big hybrid vehicle, and that is the one that we used during Endurance 22 expedition. That is the Saab Sabertooth, which is one of the few commercially existing vehicles that has these capabilities. There's many vehicles by now on the market that claim to be in some sort of hybrid. So it is very easy to build an AUV and then stick a fiber on, but very few manufacturers have actually mastered that technology and figured out how to well do these transitions between autonomous and controlled mode. Because if you are in control mode and the vehicle doesn't realize itself that the connection is lost, then yeah, obviously the vehicle is lost. So this is a very tricky thing, and Saab is one of the few manufacturers that provides a hybrid vehicle that has been frequently tested in the market and provides this hybrid capability. So you see that hybrid vehicles are a very interesting asset for us polar researchers, and I predict that there will be more hybrid vehicles coming up in the future. So thank you a lot for watching this video. I hope you liked it and found it interesting. And with that, I want to thank you a lot for watching, and have a nice day.